Today we're looking at a longsword play from Vexil, which includes an unusual change of hand position. While the grip change is an interesting curiosity, I actually find the surrounding techniques to be more useful in their application to day-to-day fencing, so we'll be looking at those in some detail. Let's begin with the big picture. We begin in Vexil on the right side. Slash upwards once, twice, and on the third slash go through under the blade, step and cut around with the flat in this case. Go around with our grip reversal into a thrust or a jab, and then cut away, again releasing the grip and withdrawing. Now let's take the whole thing apart and see what makes it work. As usual, we'll need our virtual opponent. With our blade offline, our opponent's long point threatens us should we move into distance. We deal with this by slashing up into a long point with a beat to their blade or an attack underneath to their hands. In this way, we've either displaced their blade with the beat, made their hands move with the cut, or simply threatened them with the point. In slashing upwards, we shouldn't approach too close to the opponent, so we can avoid a counterattack if they change through or displace. And we're going to maintain this initiative by continuing the rhythm with a second slash upwards to the blade, and on the third time, we break the rhythm by instead cutting underneath their sword through to their right-hand side. This kind of making and then breaking a rhythm is fairly common in Maya and forces an unexpected reaction from the opponent, giving us a moment to set up the technique. In slashing upwards, engage your hip, extend your arms and cut across your body into a good long point position. Be careful not to make the common mistake of just using your arms for the slash upwards or the beat. This leaves a triangular opening which the opponent can exploit. Likewise, if you don't extend enough, your sword will be shortened and you risk the opponent changing through or attacking on the same side of the blade. We remedy this with good structure. Engaging the hip increases the range, and extending the arms ensures our point is online, discouraging our opponent from disengaging underneath and attacking. By bringing the sword across the body, we close the line on the left, preventing any attacks on that side. The third slash passes through underneath their blade to their right side. By changing the line of threat from the left side of their blade to the right, we're hoping to invoke a sudden reaction to cover that line. This creates an opening on their upper left, which we need for the next action. Of course, if they don't, we can abort the attack. There are several attacks we can perform from this setup. We can thrust on the in or outside line. We can cut around with a Zwerchhau. We can cut with an Unterhau on the same side, or we can cut around with an Oberhau or a Zornhau. Canonically, Maya uses a false edge cut here, or the flat. We've covered the false edge before, so let's look at the flat. Striking with the flat might seem an odd choice. It's certainly not what people would call martially effective. Leaving aside certain aspects of 16th century lore, there are still some reasons we might want to use the flat of the blade. First, the flick. Notice that as we cut around, we can actually flick the point of our blade over the opponent's parry, so we still hit them in the head. This is very useful in a sporting context, not only because you can cut around your opponent's parry, but also because hitting with the flat is going to do a lot less concussive damage than hitting with the edge of the sword, so it's much more pleasant for training. Now in modern competition, often hitting with the flat is discounted. However, notice how the point is going over towards the opponent's face as well. We can quickly turn this strike with the flat into a thrust instead if we so desire. More on that later. The second advantage of the flat is best seen from the front. Here we see the full setup, we draw the parry to the right, and we cut around with the flat. Notice the angle the crossguard makes with the opponent's blade here. This V shape effectively catches the opponent's blade, preventing most of the counterattacks they're likely to perform. This is perfect for follow-up motions, particularly if you're going to turn this into a thrust. A regular cut around performs most of the same capabilities, but is not quite as good at catching the blade, sometimes requiring a slight parry on a counterattack. This is still fine, but the strike with the flat has a slight advantage here. The other slight disadvantage of the regular cut around is that it's quite easy to displace downwards from above if your opponent is taller than you are or is cutting downwards slightly. With the flat, we find that the V position of the guard and the slightly better structure give us a tiny Kron or Einhorn-like parry which prevents them from pressing us downward. Finally, while Maya is perceived as using large motions all the time, you can tighten these up as much as you want for fencing, so you can bring this big motion down into a really tight cut around with the wrists. And finally, we get to the cut from below with a reversed grip. Having slashed upward and gone through below, we cut around. At this point, we have to ensure that the opponent's blade is not a threat to us. Typically, this would be because we're hitting them with the flat and they want to parry. We cut around from below, release, catch the pommel when we come on point, allowing us to jab the opponent with the sword, and the movement is completed. If we find our opponent is slightly out of distance or doesn't try to parry our cut with the flat, we can induce them to do so with a simple thrust to the face, using a motion of the hip. We can see this from the front. We slash upwards, we cut around, and thrusting to the face causes them to come up into a slight cron parry. This creates an opening on their lower right, which we capitalize on by cutting around with our one-handed motion. Now again from the side, cut around, threat, cut under, jab. All that now remains is a withdrawing cut from above. This simply comes around in a circle by our side and cuts over so we can catch the blade and withdraw. We can actually use our left hand on the pommel to start to propel that blade by shoving it with a flicking action, which allows it to come flicking around, and we catch it again. Flick, catch, flick, catch. Just holding the hand out and catching it naturally in it. As we do so, stepping back. And once from the front. Now we know how to perform the basic movements, everything else is just repetition and practice. In day-to-day fencing, we might not be as comfortable with doing the grip change, so we can perform variations. From the cut around with the flat, we could turn this into a thrust or a blendhau with the back edge of the blade. Alternatively, having drawn the parry, we could cut around with a Zwerchhau. We could replace the one-handed cut around from underneath with a regular Unterhau. We could even perform the Unterhau to the same side as the initial attack. We now have the full technique. The most interesting part isn't the grip change, but everything that surrounds it to make it work, and that's what we should focus on when we're practicing. That's it. Thanks for watching.